very simple. Collection is also very simple. We just want to collect as much as possible. Of course, 100% might not be feasible, but we want to collect as much as possible. And pre-processing and processing is the same objective in the end. We want to recover resources. Resources means we want to recover the material out of these appliances. And then on the other side, we want to segregate the hazardous waste. So we want to make sure that the valuables and non-valuables, and especially the hazardous, are segregated, so that we can gain money from one side and we dispose of in a safe way the other side. And that's what I mean with disposal. So the main objective there is a safe disposal of hazardous fragments. So who are the main actors? And this is like, we use these charts in most of our, some of you might have seen some of our e-waste assessments we do together with our local partners. The latest from Nigeria, which is more or less what I'm showing here. So on the distribution consumption side, you first distributors, retailers of new equipment, and then you have a second-hand industry also, which is I think very relevant in a country like Ghana. So distributors, retailers of used equipment, and you also have refurbishers and repairers. Then you, of course, you have the consumers, and we usually we divide them into institutional and corporate consumers and private consumers. And you often have donations going on between them. Of course, you also have donations via imports going on. So collection, you have a communal collection. Typically, that could be that it's a specialized collection organized by a city for e-waste, but it also could be that e-waste ends up in communal collection systems, which is actually not wanted. And then in these countries we often have the informal collectors and specialists. And together we've usually attached that is informal recycling, and we call this the informal sector. So I actually want to divide this. What gets often confused is the second-hand industry, second-hand market, which can be partly informal as well, and the informal sector, which is the recycling. I think it's important to understand that this is not the same thing, because these people are not doing the same thing. They might be connected, but they're not doing the same thing. And it's important to understand this, because you want to intervene if something is going wrong in a different way with these two sectors. Then, of course, you have a formal recycling industry. I mean, we have also in Africa formal recyclers. And I call it global industry. I mean, the formal recycling industry in developing countries usually focusing on the pre-processing step until now, I say. They could change also. And then we have the end processes. And we call the end processors somebody like Yumiko. You will hear a presentation afterwards, all plastics recyclers, which you also will have presentations afterwards. And I call it global industry because this is usually it's formed like this. It's a global industry. It can be in Ghana, but it's still a global industry. No? It can be somewhere else. It's still a global industry. Okay, and then you have official dump sites where something could end up, and you have informal dumping in turn. So this is usually how everything is connected. This is a generic way, and in every country it looks a little bit different. Okay, now we have in this whole chain we have unwanted processes. This is just example. For example, the import of waste and near end-of-life electronic and electrical equipment. We also have, if the consumers are dumping e-waste with household waste, that's also something we don't want because it ends up in a dustbin and it ends up on the dump site. We cannot recover the valuables, and the hazardous substances also go there. Of course, we have the informal sector acting under harmful conditions for humans and also for the environment. It's also something we don't want. And if something ends up on the official dump site, often these secondary resources are not recovered. Secondary resources, by the way, means the material coming out of the waste. Primary resources are what we mine out of the rocks, out of geology. Secondary resources is what we mine out of the waste. So it's that's what it means. And we have emissions to the environment. Now to change these pictures we had here, to change it, we need somehow intervene in certain ways. And this is a system we came up together with our partners in many projects, which we, a generic picture, how we can classify this intervention mechanism in this recycling chain. So first of all, certain processes we want to avoid. So we don't want to have informal dumping and mining, and part of the informal recycling maybe we don't want to happen anymore. So first of all, there's a role for policy and legislation. And when defining a policy and legislation, one needs to understand the system in his country. He needs to understand where, to what actors in the system I have to mandate something, or I have to put rules something, because not everybody in the system needs rules. Some need very tough rules, others they don't really need rules. So that's why I use this system to show in certain places you need policy and legislation intervention. The other thing is business and finances, and I will come a little bit more to what that really means, but also here you need to intervene. You maybe need to enable a second income stream for recyclers, because they need money for disposing of hazardous waste. You also need to build up technology and skills, of course, that might not be available in the country from the beginning. So that's another area. Then there's a whole area of monitoring and control to enable level playing fields. And of course, last but not least, there is a lot of marketing and awareness needed in the whole system. You see, monitoring and control, it only covers the whole system from collection on. Of course, you will not want to monitor the consumer, obviously. But marketing and awareness is also important for the consumer. It's also important for the policymaker. It's important for the importers and so on. Okay, what do I mean with policy legislation? Developing a legal framework, of course, in synergy with existing policies and legal frameworks, especially related to environment, general waste management, as well as health and safety. This is important. I will show you an example why this is important, because e-waste doesn't need to cover everything, because in many countries you actually have a legislative framework on how you handle hazardous waste, maybe even, but how you avoid emissions to air. So you don't have to find that in your e-waste legislation, of course. So to ensure that all actors will play under the same rules, that's very important in order to avoid cherry picking. So you have to prepare this level playing field, that a recycler who has good intention, so a recycler who is in the yellow field there, that he can exist and he is not losing his business because there are too many recyclers on the red field over there. So that's the intention of the level playing field. By defining appropriate roles and responsibility, I will show you an example from Switzerland for this. This is very key for me in a policy, that you define the responsibilities. Who has what responsibility in the system? So example, Swiss legislation. Of course, this is for Switzerland, doesn't work maybe in Ghana in that way, but there are similarities which always can be leveraged. So first of all, in Switzerland, the consumer has the obligation to return. So I'm obliged to return my end-of-life equipment. But important, it has to be convenient for me, but free of charge. I mean, in Ghana, it would be, or in Nigeria, or in an African country in general, it would be the other way. You expect maybe somebody to pay you for that. So maybe that's already a difference. Return it to a retailer, a manufacturer, importer, or to a collection point. So that's also clear. I'm actually, I'm obliged not to put my equipment into the dustbin. I should not do that by law, actually, in Switzerland. Okay, there's the retailer, manufacturer, importer, and that's also important, because when we talk about extended producer responsibility, there is this word producer, and that's actually what we also understand about producer in Switzerland. It's not just the manufacturer, it's also the retailer and it's also the importer. Very important, because Switzerland doesn't produce computers, for example. So that's key. So they are obliged to take back anything, and they are obliged to dispose of what they get. And of course, appliances, they normally stock, manufacture or import. It's not just their brand, it's really like the type of appliances. So HP would also be obliged to take back a Dell computer. Retailer may return it to manufacturers or importers. So in Switzerland, the retailer also takes it back because the consumer can bring it to the retailer. So the producer has to accept that the retailer brings it to him and says, you have to dispose this off for me. So he's obliged to do that and dispose of via own or existing PRO. PRO is the producer responsible organization. And so they can do it by themselves if they're big enough, or they can join. So in Switzerland, the industry decided that they joined themselves into a system. It's called Swico and Sense. Swico is for IT, ICT material, and Sense is for household appliances. So they organized themselves to follow these obligations in Switzerland. So the recycler, he has to guarantee best disposal. So he will be licensed, granted by cantonal authorities and controlled by the producer responsible organization and the cantonal authorities. And the PRO, how he checks that, for example, he uses us, EMPA. We are the auditing body for the Swiss recycling system. So we go to the recycler and check if he complies with that rules. And when we do that, of course, we check if he complies with also environmental laws and so on. And then there is an exporter, and he has to prove legal disposal. So if somebody exports something, he has to prove that he is adhering to Basel Convention. Producers are responsible, but because it costs them a lot of money, they might not be interested to collect a lot. So I mean, I'm not saying that they would do that, but if you put it the wrong way, the incentives will not be there. So you have to make sure. Incentives also means enforcement, of course. To ensure that recycling is a sustainable business, also under unfavorable economic conditions. And I'll show you an example what I mean with this. By providing an additional flexible income stream in addition to revenue through sold secondary materials enabled through a financing scheme. And this is important because you might be able to make a very good business with recycled printed circuit boards and selling them, but you might not be able to make a very good business with CRTs. So you need a framework as a recycler which ensures you that you always have your income, that you can act under good conditions. You can make a profitable business. And that means sometimes, besides the material you earn from selling the material, you need another income stream. So somebody pays you for the service of disposing of hazardous waste, for example. And this is also something which gets confused often in the discussion. Many people think if the material is not enough to pay for the whole recycle, this is not a profitable business. That's wrong. Because if you're a service provider, somebody wants to pay you for this service, you will always be a profitable business as long as the people pay you the money you deserve for delivering your service, no? So otherwise, a hairdresser would not earn any money either, because he cannot sell his hair and get a lot of money for his hair. So you get paid for the service of cutting somebody's hair. That's what I mean. So in this setup, to explain this, I show you this graph. We did a short study in Tanzania where we actually checked under the current condition if the business can be run by just generating income from selling materials. And you see now, for example, you have the baseline 2010 that looked with a certain mix in the recycling stream, which is dominated by ICT material. It looks quite good. You don't need that second income stream. But before, in 2004, this wouldn't have worked. And what I want to say with this, recycling is a volatile market. So the prices change on the international market. So that's why you need a system behind you, a financing mechanism which ensures that if economy changes, you're not out of business. Okay, technology and skill, developing a qualified and efficient e-waste recycling sector with careful consideration of the socio-economic conditions, so low labor costs, and the possible roles of informal collection and dismantling before establishing a parallel system in competition to these structures. What I mean with this is in many of African countries, also Latin American countries, you actually have at some extent a working sector who is doing also very efficient things, like collection in Ghana is very efficient. So instead of putting up a competing system, a communal collection system, you rather would enjoy that there is actually people who are doing this quite well. To ensure an efficient and effective recycling chain with high value for people and environment, so socioeconomic condition has to be set right by identifying downstream processes for hazardous and valuable fractions. That's very key, because as long as you don't have a downstream process, you cannot sell anything and you don't have any income. Including interlinking the local recyclers to international recycling companies, and that gives a link then to the next two presentations. And networks for developing market outlets for the pre-processed e-waste fractions. And I just want to make sure you understand what is efficiency or effectivity in this recycling chain. Because you could have a formal system. Now this is maybe not the best case system it's actually maybe it might be a worst case system in Europe. So first of all, in Europe you have maybe collection which goes up to 60%. But this is already higher. Many systems are below 60%. Then you have a pre-processing step, and I put 25%, which might be low, but there are certain technologies even applied in Europe where you are not very efficient with regaining, and this is an example for gold. So if you use a lot of shredding techniques, you would lose a lot of the gold of printed circuit boards if you first shred the printed circuit boards. There have been some studies done which these numbers are based on. And in the end, you have the end processing, and this goes up to 95%. This is maybe not the worst case, this is one of the best cases. So for example, a plant like Umicore or Boliden, they are quite efficient in regaining the gold. But if you look at the end processing, this looks great. But if you look at the other parts, you see that the overall efficiency is a combined efficiency, and the overall net yield of the gold recovery then is 15%, which is really low. So we lose 85% of the gold out of that in that recycling chain. On the other side, we have informal system. You see, it goes up to 80%, and we actually in Ghana, we calculated that it could be even up to 90 or 95% the collection efficiency in Ghana, because there's so much incentives for people to collect this stuff. So that's great. I mean, that's really good. Then you have a pre-processing step, which might also not be so efficient. I will show you afterwards an example from India, 50%, and then you have end processing, like in India you had you have crude processes where they leach gold out of the printed circuit boards, which is also 50%. So the overall net yield is in a similar area like the worst case in Europe. So important is to understand that we have to really understand each step, and we have to maximize in each step what we are doing, that we are not losing the resource and we are not losing the money along this recycling chain. So the material recovery efficiency of the entire recycling chain depends on the efficiency of each step and how well the interfaces between these interdependent steps are managed. That's very key in the whole thing. So the example is the informal sector Bangalore, state-of-the-art smelt on the other side. Not telling you who that is, that picture. So in Bangalore, for example, only 20% really gets recovered, because we have 60% lost due to manual dismantling processes. So they cut out certain part which they think they have a lot of gold out of the printed circuit boards, and they don't realize that they actually lose already at that step some of the gold. And they have 50% lost due to the wet chemical leaching process, because this is not an efficient process. It harms the people, and it also harms the environment, of course. On the other side, we have recovery rates of up to 95%, plus we also recover other metals like palladium, silver, copper, etc. And here in Bangalore, we have dramatic emissions up to 400 times of European threshold, so that's really dramatic. And on the other side, if we look at the global industry, they are supposed to have high-tech off-gas control and treatment systems. Okay. I will not go into detail. I'll show you this as an example. Now, of course, there's a lot of material around and guidance manual and so on, what that means, pre-processing steps. So usually you have to decide between if you're going in pre-processing to manual processing or mechanized processing. I think you had the opportunity yesterday to discuss this quite extensively. And then you have in the pre-process, you have different kinds of technologies you apply in manual or in mechanized processes. Like you have this eddy current and all kinds of these technologies. And then in the end, you will always reach a point where you actually need to identify an end processor. Not for every fraction. Some fractions you might be able to sell directly. But for printed circuit boards and others, you need to find an outlet. And I included here some reference documents which are available to me. There might be others, but I think there are some of the key ones. There's from PACE quite a good guidance document which explains how all this recycling chain, the technologies work. There's something for plastics, there's something for batteries and so on, and I think you will hear maybe you will get some more information from the speakers afterwards. So just a short word about monitoring and control. I will talk about that tomorrow. So monitoring and control was the other area I told you which is important in the whole recycling chain. So this is to ensure continuous improvement and maintaining compliance of the e-waste sector, and by implementing monitoring and control mechanisms which favor high standard operations and allow businesses to grow in a level playing field. So again, level playing field is key, and this will be tomorrow's topic anyway, so I'm not losing time for this. And thank you very much. Yeah, that was it. Thank you.